Hello, and welcome back to Owens Bay. In this week's episode, we're heading out to a stretch of coastline with a complicated history. An old mining port that once drove the local economy but left its mark on the environment. The surrounding area is now getting a second chance as we clean up the scars left behind by decades of industrial use and begin to reshape the landscape. The port still remains, but is now joined by a new presence, a marine institute focused on research and ecological restoration. It's a story of renewal, balance, and learning to live with the past while building for the future. The area we're going to be working on today is coming into view right now. My name is Geifs, and let's get started. So what we're going to be doing here is creating a bit of back history for the region, the area, how it existed in the early part of the 20th century, when the only thing out here was the Dominion copper mine. This is a pretty remote location, especially in the first decade of the 20th century. There would be, other than the indigenous population, there'd be practically nobody here. And so the mine needs a way to get the copper ore out of the region and off into other parts of the world, most probably Britain at this point. So we're going to create a port facility here, and we're going to put it in a very unfortunate location. We're going to put it right beside what should really be, in modern times, would be probably designated as a national park. But of course, at this point in history, nobody was really familiar with this area. It was like sitting on what most people would consider the edge of the world. There'd be no documentation of it, few photographs of it, very few people would even know it's here. The owners of the mining facility were just looking for a deep water port, and this was it, and this is where it got built here. What I'm doing right at this moment is I'm just laying out the general structure of the port. It's obviously going to be a rune. I'll be coming back later in the episode to detail that out for that, but right now I'm just putting down the basic structure of it, how I want it to look. It's really stripped down. We got to remember, this thing has been abandoned for like probably the last 60 years or so there's not a lot left of it. So there's not going to be like super mountain detail. There's not going to be a lot of machinery here. A lot of it's going to be removed a long time ago. Now, one unfortunate side effect of facilities like this is the environmental damage it caused. Copper mining, the copper tailings, there's a lot of toxic material. It would have been seeping into the bay here for literally decades. By the time the mine shuts down in the late 70s, early 80s, somewhere in there, this is the time where people are becoming a little more ecologically aware, becoming more aware that this is actually like a beautiful location, and a bit of public outrage that it's been left in this state. At the time, the government and the Hawthorne University decide to join forces and build what is essentially a marine institute here. Its primary function is to marine research for the university, but also a secondary mission of cleaning up the environment around the area. And that's what we're going to be building here with this building. We're using the aquarium for this. And we can imagine this as like the government pumped a lot of money into this because ecological concerns were a big thing for whatever this particular election campaign or season or cycle. This was on everybody's mind, so a lot of money got dumped into this. So we get this really nice big facility out in the middle of nowhere. And of course, it's joined to the university, so the students come out here to study. It also has a tourist function here. I'm not sure if the building itself actually functions as a tourist destination. I don't think it does. We're going to create an actual aquarium with an outdoor facility for... This would have been quite in vogue earlier, like in the middle of the last century, where we're going to create an outdoor pool here. The path tool here with a retaining wall on the inside to create the edges of the pool, and we're going to use some of the water surfaces here to create the actual water surface. Another problem from the past is keeping large marine mammals in captivity for our amusement and entertainment. So that's what this pool is about here. Of course, in modern times, that's not what this is being used for anymore. I know sometimes marinas use these sorts of facilities to house animals that are not, like, can no longer function in the natural environment. So it might have some dolphins, beluga whales, or something like that in there that are being orphaned or hurt or injured and can no longer be returned to their natural environment. But it's no longer used as, it doesn't have orcas or anything like that anymore. I think you get the idea. Although people do come out here to visit it, it is rather remote from any of the towns out here, so maybe not the best placement, but I just like the idea of it. It's also a tourist attraction. We're going to have a few buildings that are catering to that. We're going to use this one stop or whatever it is, kind of like a tacky tourist shops and cafes and all that sort of stuff. We're also going to be using some office buildings here for the actual Marine Institute. This is the buildings where the actual research gets done. And adjacent to this area, we have a whole region fairly close to one of the edges of the map here. We're going to keep this whole area in here fairly rural. The main focus is going to be these two buildings here, the Marine Institute and the abandoned port. But we also have quite a large area to fill in as well. I'm just going to do some fairly basic landscape detailing here. I'm going to come back a little later and finish it off. What's so typical for me is I jump around all over the place, so do half of it now and half of it later. Now, I know some people might be a bit unhappy with me, like I created this really beautiful picturesque ocean landscape here, and now I put a bunch of things that don't seem to really belong with it on top of it, and it's deliberate. I've done this on purpose because a lot of times in the real world this is exactly what happens. The port was built at a time where nobody cared about the environmental impacts, nobody cared about the natural beauty, they just cared about how much money they were going to make by extracting resources out of the ground. And then of course at later decades they have to come in and try to work with it and try to fix it, and also those fixes are also come with their own problems like tourism and tourist attractions and all that sort of thing. And a lot of times in a lot of parts of the world, these things coexist in awkward and unusual ways, and that's what I'm trying to do here with this. Creating another little like dock area down here. This is actually for the Marine Institute. This is what the Institute's going to use for launching boats. Mining port dock is going to be left as a ruin. Okay, now we got this whole area out here. Now what are we going to do here? I want to keep this mostly rural. Did mention in the last episode I was a little unhappy of how I detailed out some sections. I said in the episode that I really should have detailed them more as rural properties, and that's what I'm going to be doing here. So this is going to be reminiscent of Raven's Run, the way I built up that whole area. This is going to be similar in many ways to it. Interestingly, I like how I detailed this out a little more than I did Raven's Run. I think I've learned a fair amount over the last few months about how to go about these sorts of things, and I have to admit it was a very strong urge to go back and redo Raven's Run, but I am not going to do that. One thing that I haven't really been focusing on or showing off here is, unfortunately, when you do heavily modded games with lots of custom assets and decals and all this sorts of stuff, things tend to break. And the update we had a few weeks ago, a month ago now, it broke a fair number of things. I've been keeping most of that off camera. There are aspects of Raven's Run that are not really functional. There's parts all over the map now that are like falling into disrepair. And that's also another indication that we're approaching the end of the series. We still have quite a few episodes to do yet, but what's been happening now is rather than building new things, a lot of what I'm doing seems to be maintenance, trying to restore and maintain what's already been built. What I've been doing down here is establishing what these areas are going to look like. There's going to be some light farming. It's not really a farming region, but we're just going to put in a few farms in here. Essentially what I'm building is a unincorporated area of the region. So this isn't like an official town or anything like that. It's just a small collection of commercial buildings along the highway and a light scattering of residential properties throughout the region and a bit of industrial as well. It's just a mixed bag of a bunch of different things. Using some of these farming surfaces here to cover up some of the vanilla farm surfaces. These get really monotonous after a while, and these new surfaces here, I wish I had these when I was doing Raven's Run. I might go back to Raven's Run and just put in a few of these new surfaces. They're a lot better than the options I had at the time. And once again, I'm going to take advantage of some of these natural depressions in the landscape here just to add a few extra lakes and stuff. And that's pretty much it for the building and road layout. It's pretty basic. There's, like I said, there's not a lot out here. Trying to figure out how to place things down in a more organic way, like there's not like a lot of urban planning out here. It's just things like just evolve the way they evolve. Now, even this far away from like urban centers, we are going to start seeing a bit of suburban sprawl even out here. And that's what I'm going to be building here. It's going to be like, you see these dotted over outside of like major urban centers for quite some distance now from like major towns, but just small collections of densely packed in cookie cutter type housing. We can imagine somebody sold a part of their farm or property here for this to be created. Also, I'm going to be putting down a fire station. I've been noticing, unfortunately, a lot of my rural areas, that seems to be the number one problem, is they're too far from like fire services, so a lot of things have been burning down. So I have to put that out here. I'm going to imagine this building as, it's not just a fire station. For a rural area like this, it's very likely it would be like the fire station, the police station, and maybe some ambulance. Not necessarily a medical clinic, but an ambulance station. So if there's an emergency out here, the ambulance can go pick up the person and drive them into town. But we don't really have anything to represent that in game yet. For these rural properties, they'd be quite large and most likely some rectangular shape, which is what I'm doing here. They would be much larger than the property sizes that come with game, so we're just gonna draw these in around the buildings. The houses themselves don't necessarily have to be too complicated. The people out here don't necessarily have tons and tons of money. There are some expensive homes, but for the most part, it's working people out here. And I'm just going to be using bushes and trees to frame in the yards. I also deleted out, as you probably noticed, like all the fences and stuff here. Those sorts of props don't really make a lot of sense for this sort of area. I spend a considerable amount of time detailing this little intersection here with this gas station and a few other commercial buildings right along the highway there. I don't know what it was about it, but it really seemed to take a lot of my attention. And I'm also going to be using a few surfaces just to break up the monotony of the map texture here. Some of these nice grass surfaces here. I'm just randomly mixing a bunch to see what I can get. I think the biggest issue with these is these hard edges you get with the transitions. With enough layering, you can definitely minimize them, but it's obviously, you can see all the lines here. There's quite a lot of layering that needs to be done in order to get that to work. But it also looks really nice. It blends, when it works really well. And in areas where it's not working very well, I'm just going to use bushes and trees to just hide the edges a little bit so they're not so obvious. It's not all necessarily about covering every last square inch with trees, although that is a big part of what I do with this area. But it's also trying to think about areas where there might not be as many trees, or trees that are being removed and are starting to grow back, these kind of transitional areas, and just like opening up some sections. So if you imagine driving through the region, you get some interesting views. And once again, I'm just jumping around all over the place. When I'm working on this sort of thing, I'm like working on the whole area at the same time. So I do a little bit of detailing one section, and then I go off to do something else. And I'm like, in the back of my head, I'm still thinking about it. I'm like, okay, I did that bit, do something else, then come back. Oh, I can add this. So it's this kind of back and forth process over the entire area. My brain doesn't work as like focusing in on one location at a time and detailing it to completion. I'm doing bits and pieces all over the area, and it comes into focus all at the same time, if that makes any sense. At this moment, I'm thinking this is probably the last bit of development along the coastline here. I really want to keep a good chunk of it wild and undeveloped. Yeah, that might change, but I don't really have any plans to build anything else along this area. For some of these sections, I'm going to be using a gravel road net lane to cover up the vanilla road here. These look so much better than the vanilla roads. I couldn't help noticing that this building right down here, the business, is Get in a Cabin. And I'm like, oh, okay, let's actually work with that. And it sells these little modular garden homes or cabins or tiny homes or whatever they are. And so I'm just going to put a collection of them out here for stock you can go look around at and see what they actually make. And we're going to put a bit of advertising right along the highway here for it as well. Breaking up a bit of the monotony here of this pavement surface. Here I'm going to use some of the grass surfaces to layer them up and try to break up this farming surface here a little bit, so it's not something a little different. I'm going to put down some cow spawners down there so we have some livestock wandering around the actual farm. What I want to make down here is a woodlot, not for cutting down wood, but more for a gathering place for logs and stuff. This is kind of like where they're gathered and sorted and maybe chopped down a little bit before they're actually sent off to a proper sawmill. And these are pretty chaotic spaces, really messy, and I'm just going to be using surfaces here to create that kind of look. Trying to create a bit of a random mess here. Random logs scattered about made a bit of sense. And we're going to use these log piles. Somebody brought them back into the game. Why these were taken out or made so we couldn't use them, I don't really know. They're very useful. And this rubble piles of scrap wood here all over the place. A few industrial vehicles here to make it look like something's going on. And some final shading just to blend everything together a little more. And it really needs the trees to encase it, frame it. Without them, it doesn't look quite right. But once you start adding all the trees around it, all of a sudden this area looks much better. And I don't know what happened here, but that's an interesting terrain malfunction. It's essentially that roundabout there was causing the issue. So once we deleted and just readjusted, it's fine. Now this has been going on, and this is homeless people or unhappy people leaving the city, and there is a lot of people leaving my city. It's crazy. Like this just goes on for ever and ever. Yet my population numbers they go up and they come down. I've been hovering around, I think 94, what are we at? Yeah, 94,000. But is it like just a constant stream of people leaving? I'm not really too sure. Okay, let's do the final bit of detailing here on the abandoned port. Now we're going to use like real vision decals here for the surfaces. I'm just trying to cover up as much as the pristine surfaces here as possible to make it look like it's old and been sitting here for a very long time. And using a bit of stains to blend these things together really does help it a lot. Bunch of rubble to indicate buildings and structures that used to be here that are long gone. It's very likely if this was in the real world, this would all be removed by the Marine Institute, the ecological restoration. They probably would remove this. It's here simply for the aesthetics and the look, and I just think it's a nice, wonderful contrast between the natural beauty and then the man-made chaos that's been imposed on top of it. I'm also going to be using some bushes here just to hide some of the seams of the poles and tie them all together so they make it look like it's one uniform surface underneath it all. This is like an abandoned railroad line in here, so we're going to use gravel surfaces to cover up all this vanilla surfaces here. And some crumbling wall decals and some rust decals as well to make these buildings look really like they've been sitting here for several decades unused. going to finish off the dock area for the Marine Institute. We're going to use a wooden dock. And I'm just going to use it to frame the road here. I'm not really sure what's going on. I've been getting a lot of jerky camera motion lately. I'm not sure if it's something I'm doing or if the game is being a bit stuttery. And one little detailing experiment here at the very end. There's something I've been wanting to do with some of the mountaintops for quite some time and make them look more like mountaintops, which the game doesn't really do very well at all. And I thought I'd do a little experiment up here. This is an interesting peak. It is really quite some beautiful views of the surrounding area. I want to turn in more of a rocky outcropping at the very top rather than like tree covered. I'm going to use the rock surface and some of the grass surfaces here to tone it down a little bit. And some of these cobble surfaces, a broken up rocky surface. This is an experiment. I need to play around with this a bit more. It's far from perfect here, but it's kind of like the initial test of it, I suppose. Some of these grass deckles here to indicate some moss growing on the rocks, and then just some trees. I think the issue here might be this might not have been the best mountain to try this out on. It's not the most dramatic mountain. Once again, it's just an experiment, and I'll have to play around with this a bit more. That pretty much brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you so much for watching to the very end. I do appreciate it. It really does help out the algorithm when people watch the entire video. In next week's episode, we're going to be moving on to a brand new town. We're going to go for a kind of an industrial kind of vibe for that one. Anyway, I will see you all next week. Bye.